Welcome to Things I Wish I Knew, the podcast from Thinking Faith, a work of the Jesuits in Britain. I'm Julia, I'm in my early 30s, and I used to live in a Jesuit young adult community. We all live hectic lives and often don't get time to reflect on what's happening both to us and around us. This podcast is meant to help you to take a moment to stop and think about where you are, where you're going, and where your relationship with God fits into it all. Every week I'll meet a new guest who tells me about something they experienced which changed their life forever. By talking about the things they wish they'd known, we'll explore the idea that God is in all things. And we'll talk about the part that faith plays in navigating life's challenges. Today I'm speaking to Jean, who is a millennial and works as a freelance consultant. She's also worked in banking and has a theology degree. We talked about how it feels to be an adult as a millennial. I found this conversation with Jean really interesting because she spoke about how being an adult hasn't turned out the way she was expecting, but also about how churches adopt to the tensions between millennials and Gen Z. So Jean, what does being a millennial mean to you?
Well, it's my age group, right? So I guess it's somebody who's, I don't even know the ages, remember the boundaries now, but I think it's 26 to, just under 40, is it? To 40?
Yeah, I can't remember the top age. It's like 1996 is like the divide between millennials and Gen Z.
Yeah. So I don't see it much more than, strictly speaking, the age group. But in terms of how the world treats us or refers to us is different. And I don't want to say it's any better or any worse than any other generation, but there's a difference. If I was Gen X, I'd probably have a lot more to say because I think they've been treated potentially worse than millennials. But I think I would say it's my age for the most part.
Do you think the saying, I'm not old, but I'm not young, resonates with you at this 100%. Stage?
I think it's one of the weird things that happens, and you guys were talking about it briefly before we started, that when you turn 30, everything seems to change. And it's a really weird experience because actually 2 days ago you were young, the next day you're old, or 2 days later you're old. And people kind of say when you're in your 30s you're middle-aged, but really, are you? And especially as medical advances go on, people are living a lot longer. And I still think being in your 30s, you're still quite young. I think there's even an argument to say you're not really an adult until you hit 40. But people have children in their 30s. We were sold that dream that you buy your house when you're in your 30s. And so it's almost like an adult now. But I still think you're a young adult because I have still made mistakes in my 30s, learned a lot that I think actually I wouldn't have learned this in my 20s. I couldn't have learned this in my 20s. But I'm going to need these experiences as I grow older. And also, millennials look young. And so,
is it all the good skincare that we're doing?
Maybe. And actually, sometimes that's even an annoyance because I think some millennials look young and are treated as though they're younger. But millennials don't have that same, for want of a better expression, boss attitude that Gen Z does. So even though Gen Z might look young, they behave more aggressively and more forward, I think, than millennials tend to do because of our different constraints.
But I also wonder if that's like the ages that we are, because I feel like when we were teenagers, we were a bit more, I think it is just being a teenager, right? In some ways. I'm not saying all Gen Z are teenagers still because they're older now, but I feel like as you get into your 30s, you start to settle in and accept this is what life is now. And so then you're less got that boss attitude.
I want to say yes and I want to say no because I feel partly because of social media and not necessarily a good or a bad thing in this conversation. Social media has allowed Gen Z to make money a lot earlier than millennials. And so although teenagers could always make a lemonade stand at the end of their road or, mow the lawn, you earn very little money from that. But actually you could be 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 and earning £100,000 simply because you've posted a few videos on YouTube. And so because of that, the whole mindset, not just of you, but your whole cohort of people is different. It is more, I can do this, I can change the world. Whereas for us, it's almost like you have to take this step, you have to take the next step before you progress forward. So I think that experience makes it slightly different for us.
Yeah, that's so true. And I was just thinking, when we were at a similar age, we were told, like, go to school, go to university, get a good job, get married, and then buy a house, like have children. Like, that was how we were told that was how you had to live your life. And like, that's the right way to live your life. But when you look now, as you said, like there's 16, 17-year-olds making a lot of money on YouTube, Instagram and TikTok, like buying their own houses, buying their parents' houses.
Yeah.
Like, it's a very different way of living.
Yeah. And going to that, we, at least the millennials that are older, so late 30s, we kind of grew up when the financial crash happened. And when the financial crash happened for us, it was like, okay, things are going to, booms and busts happen. It's going to be okay. But actually, 10, almost 20 years later, actually, we haven't been able to recover from that. But we've still gone down that path of go to school, get a good job, buy a house. A lot of us, myself included, gone to very good schools, earned a lot of money, but still haven't got a house. Whereas Gen Z, they've kind of known from the beginning that this pattern doesn't work. So mentally, they've been able to adjust and say, actually, maybe I shouldn't go to university. Maybe I should try and make money a lot sooner because there's another path here, because the traditional path doesn't work. When I look at my older brothers and sisters or my older uncles, that route hasn't worked for them. Not only that, they also experienced COVID. So they've also been aware of the fact that anything can happen. You can't plan for everything. And so their mind, even around money and life, is, I would say, totally different from millennials because of their just life experiences.
So how do millennials adapt to this new living?
This is a good question, and it's something I'm trying to work through myself. I think millennials, it's easy for us to say, woe is me, and say, we were lied to, we were sold this dream, everybody's calling us lazy, but we're not that lazy. Actually, a lot of us are paying taxes, we've been paying taxes, we're supporting the system. The world owes us something. But I think rather than taking that approach, I think we need to recognize, one, that medical advances really do mean that most of us still have more than half of our life to live. And so we can actually change and adapt and take some of the learnings from our younger, I call them brothers and sisters, Gen Z, Gen Alpha folks, and change the way we approach things and not be stuck in a rut and see, okay, so what kind of side hustle can I do? How can I pivot? If I don't like my life, what can I do to make it better? What one thing can I do today to change that?
So, talking of side hustles, firstly, what do you mean by side hustles?
Oh, that's a good question. In this day and age, I would describe it as an extra income that isn't your main income. But many people have multiple side hustles. Some are podcasting and getting money from adverts on YouTube if they're blessed enough to have a huge listenership.
I should say that you're laughing because I was making faces about podcasts, to be fair.
And also I'm thinking about my own podcast. I have a podcast as well. Some people are doing consulting out there, marketing and media expertise. Some people are selling tops. Like, you can think of many different ways that you can make money on the side.
Which is good because you're making money, but life isn't all about making money. So does that not lead people into like burnout? If they're like working a full-time job and then they're doing like multiple side hustles or even one side hustle?
Yeah, I guess I'm not advocating work as hard as you can because I believe in Sabbath and rest. And I believe there's also a place for trusting God. But I think there's a way to work a bit smarter. Potentially, it could be like a hobby that you use as a way of release. And there's a fine line between burnout and I'm just doing this because I like it and it brings in a little of money. I know I had a friend who used to do this for photography, sorry. She used to take pictures of her friends when they'd given birth or at weddings. And it got to a point where she was like, no, I was doing this for fun. I can make money from this, but it doesn't have to overtake my life. So I think there is a fine line that you can balance it.
I was just thinking about how the wedding photographer at my brother's wedding, his side hustle was doing wedding photography. And he was saying to us about how actually now it brings in more income than his day-to-day job.
Yeah.
So his day-to-day job had actually kind of turned into a side hustle. Yeah. Done a flip.
Well, that's interesting, right? Because the question then becomes, why hasn't he given up one or the other? And that's an interesting discussion for many different people. Some people would say, oh, I need the money because maybe I want to buy a house as an aim. But then I think to your point about burnout, there is a place for us to step back, especially coming from the Christian faith and saying, right, I'm okay. I don't need to do this. The world would continue working on this, what's it called, the rat race.
Oh,
yeah, sorry. Striving for stuff. But actually there's a point in life when we are supposed to step back and say, is this what the will of God is? How can I use my newfound freedom to benefit others?
My next question was going to be, how does God fit into it all? First of all, into that like narrative of like, go to school, go to university, get a job, get married, have kids, buy a house, etc. in whatever order that comes in. But then if people are now having to like fit in side hustles, how does like God fit into all of that with all the busyness?
Yeah. So for me, I've been involved in the faith and workspace, and the reason why I'm passionate about it is because I grew up in a church which focused predominantly on evangelism. Now, evangelism is the whole point of the gospel, right? We spread the news, the good news, and people come to Christ. The question then becomes, after I've given my life to Christ, what next? And my belief, based on Romans chapter 8, is that our work as Christians is to partner with God on what he's trying to do on the earth. And that creation is waiting for us to do that work, whatever that might be. And so for me, our work is helping or being the hands or feet of God, bringing heaven, what things are on heaven, on earth. So in answer to your question, it is when somebody is doing their digital marketing, when somebody is a doctor, what they're actually doing is using the gifts that God has given to bring heaven on earth. And so our callings are not just related to how many people have we told the good news to. There's also a witness of my work is excellent, my work is good, I'm bringing glory to God. I'm showing people, like you can imagine having conversations with people about your work and they can be like, why do you work to this standard? And this is because the Bible teaches that I'm supposed to do everything unto the Lord. So I think in everything that we're doing, God is involved. God is moving through it. If we're able to recognize and believe and accept and know that we're partnering with God, our work is actually sacred and it means something, I think it's a game changer. And I think that's what Christians, times before, when we've seen great revivals before, we hear about, you may have heard about the Quiet Revival, where younger people are coming back to church. But in revivals past, all of those awakenings of the soul and the spirit were accompanied by actual action, social action, change in society. So I think the two are together. It's a mistake to separate them out.
Yeah, and they're saying like the Quiet Revival is coming from a younger generation, so Gen Z and Gen Alpha, but it's because they've not known church in their lives previously, and now they're finding something's missing and they're starting to turn to church, which is a really good thing. But how do you think that's impacting millennials?
Yeah, so there are a number of things I think about this. I also think, and it's not really spoken about that often in the church, that there's a group of unchurched millennials who are beginning to ask themselves, is this it? I mean, we spoke briefly about some of the millennials who may feel life as not gone the way they wanted because of life generally. But there's also a group of millennials who are comfortable, who have money, who have achieved what they want in their careers. They're settled, whether it's married or in committed relationships, and they're asking themselves, is this it? Example of this is Stephen Bartlett's always talking about these faith questions. What do we do? Is it all real? And he claims to be an atheist. And for some reason, the church hasn't woken up to. These people might not be coming into the doors of the church in the same way Gen Z are, but they're actually aware that there's something missing. The second is the millennials who have been in church for a long time, and they feel that for whatever reason, they aren't really fulfilling their calling or living up to what they heard God say to them when they were younger, when they were teenagers. Maybe it's because actually the people who were going to hand over the church to them are still living, they're still active. And we want those people to be still engaged in the church. And then also you have the younger generation who are coming up, and the older ones don't really know how to connect to young people. So they're giving the younger Gen Z people more opportunities and using them a lot more. And then you've got this group of millennials who are like, what about us? And I feel there's also another group within that who have been hurt by the church. And they still love Jesus Christ, but they just think, I'm done with this now. And so we have this tension of those people are just sitting on the sidelines and they're not contributing as much as they could, partly because of the hurt, but partly because the church has stopped talking to them.
I'm just going to go back to that working with the young people. I feel like that's always been in place. And so when millennials were younger, because we're still saying millennials are young, they were given those responsibilities. But now that they're not the youngest generation, they've been taken away and passed on to the younger generation. But there's nothing to like give the millennials in the meantime. And they're just being left drifting.
So I would say two things to that. I agree. When I talk about this idea of millennials, what I'm not entirely sure of is whether or not this is because the church, generally speaking, doesn't know how to deal with people in their 30s and 40s. And I think boomers might have said the same thing back then, and that could be true. But I would say one of the things that at least I know from my friends and people I engage with is there are things that we were told, you can't do this because it's not your time yet, you're too young, Gen Z are allowed to do. I can give examples of like preaching on social media. I've known so many times, so many millennials who were told, you're too young to be doing this, you need to be trained, or even engaging with secular music or secular culture in a certain way that was deemed to be worldly. But now for Gen Z, and I'm not saying that was wrong or right, but it's more those restrictions in a certain way, I think, curtailed some of the creativity that millennials had at the time, and it's made people sit down.
I think also, going back to your point of like church doesn't know how to deal with people in their 30s and 40s, I think it only has really one narrative, which is it's an assumption by your 30s you'll have children. And we know how to preach to you or to work with you if you're a parent. But if you don't have a child, they don't know how to like what to do. Because like it's almost like, oh, we're evangelizing the children, and through that we'll get to their parents. But if you're not a parent, you're not being caught in that bubble.
100%. And of course, that might be why it's more apparent now, because generally speaking, the trends are people in their 30s and 40s are having fewer children, at least in the Western world, because of financial constraints, career, etc., etc. But I guess I would push back and challenge on the parents piece, because I agree that the church knows how to speak to parents because parents want their children to grow up in the church. But the actual parent themselves, they're not really contributing that much to the church in their 30s and their 40s. They are still, it's almost like their only calling is to be a parent or to be a husband or a wife. Just to say though, that is an important calling, and it's one of the few callings that only that person can do in the earth, right? So you can only be, for the time that you're alive, the parent to your child. Whereas the calling to be an investment banker, someone else can take your job at any time. So that's not to diminish or say that those callings of parenthood and spousal commitments are not important, But I think the church still doesn't do well talking to the whole person of the 30 and 40-year-old.
I spent so much of my time in my 20s talking about vocations, and your vocation being much deeper than just being in the Catholic Church anyway, a priest, a nun, married. Like, they're not the only options, but quite often when people talk about vocations, that's like the limit they give. And I'm always like, well, that's not actually talking to the majority of younger people who aren't yet married and don't have a calling to priesthood or being in religious life as well.
100% agree. And when we narrow vocation to that, it kind of abdicates our responsibility as a church in changing the world. And I think that's why the church missed or wasn't involved in the development or propagation of social media. Like, we really missed that boat. I guess I'm concerned that if we don't start thinking about vocation in a certain way, engaging millennials in a particular way, the same thing will happen with AI.
Yeah, I was just thinking, though, there are some good examples of the churches also working with millennials. So I just want to make sure.
Yes. No. So I'm glad you said that. So, because I'm not saying that the church doesn't use millennials. That is not true. I mean, I've had a lot of opportunities myself, and I know I have groups of friends who are millennials who are pastors of churches, and I'm sure many of you can think of your priest or a vicar who is a millennial. But I'm saying that there are a lot more people who could be involved, and they're really just on the sidelines, like training. Like, if you think about football analogy, they're on the sidelines, not even on the bench. They're just in the stands.
But I think there's also something about, do they want to be involved, and do they feel like they have a place? Because being on like the steering group of the young adult mass at Farm Street, we also have this challenge of a lot of people come in for mass every week, and we try and engage them. We try and say, will you volunteer? Will you do this? Will you do that? And they don't stand up and say, yes, I'm willing to volunteer. And what we've come to realise is also that they don't feel that ownership to volunteer. Like, they don't feel it's their place. So I think there's also that challenge of, how do we change that narrative? Like, you don't just come to church to volunteer, but like, how do we make it so that people feel like it is their place to volunteer? Yeah,
I think it's teaching. It's with everything, right? The more we're taught to, like, a basic principle in Christianity is, we all know that we're supposed to give. That's a basic. So, and that's because we've been taught it for years and years and years. And I think the more I do think that it's a bit problematic for churches in that they want to talk to Gen Z because they feel that's where the Lord is moving. I shouldn't say they feel, because the Lord is doing something in Gen Z, right? I think there needs to be a way to emphasize, we also want people who are older, because we need discipleship. Who's going to disciple Gen Z? So I think it's through teaching that you get that to happen. And also, when you have a community, when you see people like you involved, engaged in the church, you're more likely to be involved.
So how do you think we connect with the millennials who are feeling hurt or disconnected?
By the church.
By the church, yeah.
No, so I think it's two-sided. I think millennials, firstly, need to accept their hurt. So it's easy to be proud and say, I've forgiven, but your behavior is still the same. You know, there's this thing that we say, and I'm still struggling with it because I don't think it's Christian, but it's what we're taught. But then I understand it because people need boundaries. And we use this thing like expression, I've forgiven, but I've not forgotten.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to understand, is that what Jesus meant when he's talking about forgiveness? But I take the point about boundaries, right? The millennials I've come across, they say they're forgiven, but they're hurt, who are hurt. They don't want to contribute to church because they know they don't want to experience that same level of pain or rejection again. So I think there's a work of the Holy Spirit that needs to be done in our hearts. And I'm included in this. I don't contribute to the church in the same way I did when I was younger. Probably because of church hurt, if I'm honest with myself. So I think that's the first thing. We need to allow the Holy Spirit to do that work in us, to help us to forgive and move on, move forward. So that's the millennial. I think the church needs to acknowledge that church hurt is real and not dismiss it. I think a lot of millennials and also Gen Z are going from church to church to church. And sometimes some vicars, pastors are not familiar with the experiences that people have had. And so they may be dismissive. But I think there's a place to acknowledge that actually people have been burnt out, people have been hurt, and there's a space where people should be allowed to express that, but then also try to re-engage these millennials, accepting that they're hurt, but that they still have something to contribute to the church. As I said, our lives are generally speaking getting longer. So if you're in your 30s now, and if you think about Prince Charles, who's now King Charles, started his work at 73, and his mum lived to 90, I can't remember the exact age. Does that mean for the next 40 to 60 years, you're not going to be contributing to the church because of hurt that you had in your 20s and 30s? So I think it's work for both sides to do.
I was just thinking about, and I don't know in other denominations, I know this probably from the Catholic perspective, we're seeing that as more generations that are coming back into church, is that they're coming more in a traditional way, and that's what they're finding their faith in. But then millennials, I would say, tend to be, and this is my assumption, tend to be a little less traditional. They're looking for something maybe a bit more progressive in the Catholic Church. Has that been your experience of going to church and what you've seen?
So I will start from the point of, I think God is fantastic in that church is so varied and vibrant and different in all these different settings. And the most fantastic thing for me is somehow, some way, people meet him in every single setting. So that's where we start from. I grew up, actually I was confirmed. My dad is Catholic. So I had a Catholic exposure. My mum and dad were divorced. And so my mum comes from a more charismatic, evangelical background. So for most of my childhood, I was in a charismatic movement. And then when I made the decision, I was in a charismatic church for like 20 years. But I felt there was a point, and maybe because I did theology as well at university, I felt there was a point for me that I needed to be in an environment which was a bit more regulated, for want of a better expression. I wanted an environment that I was still familiar, which is why I'm in an evangelical Anglican setup, but then has this rhythm and tradition. And I don't know if this is going to be my place forever, but I do think that people sometimes, especially because there's chaos in the world, I feel some people may find that they need to be in a setting which they can rely on. And some of the liturgies in the more established and older churches do that for them. And that's where they meet God. And then on the other side, on the flip side, for millennials, where we might have grown up in a situation where there was a lot more structure, it was a lot more rigid, you had to do this, you had to be that. And people felt maybe that they can't really express themselves freely in these environments, which are a bit more traditional. So they may choose a more modern, I don't like using the word progressive because it has a lot of connotations.
That is also true. I was a bit hesitant when I used it, but yeah.
In a more modern setting. But I think no matter where a person goes to church, for me, the key piece is, do you encounter and meet God? And in each of those settings, I find it so mind-boggling that a person can go into church and just in the silence meet God. Whereas for me, that might be a bit confusing. I might be looking around like, what's going on? I need to be in a place where I can lift my hands, sing a few songs. But that person that meets God in the silence, they won't meet them when they're lifting their hands. And I think that's beautiful. And I think we should embrace that and learn from one another.
And that's so true. Like, God meets us with who we are and where we're at that time. Because I've definitely had times in my life where I've found God in the singing and the arm lifting, but I've also found God at other times in the silence.
Exactly.
So what things do you wish you knew about adulting?
What I wished I knew, I want to say life is not that deep. Life is deep, but it's not that deep. And the most important thing, the most important friend is Jesus Christ. if you can hold on to that and believe that no matter the ups and the downs, you'll be all right. And to find time, actually, this is critical. Find time to spend time with the Lord every day. I think I've noticed between my friends who I grew up with in the church, so the people that have stayed Christian in the life that I've lived over the past 25, 30 years, are people who have made that time to spend time with the Lord every single day. Like, that's really what separates those of us that are able to stay with the Lord when life gets hard, because life will get hard. For me, my brother passed away during COVID. I've had operations. I failed at university. As I said, my parents divorced. We've had ups and downs, like life, been church hurt, all these kinds of things. The only thing that keeps you focused and sure is that time with the Lord. And I just want to say, I'm not making it legalistic. I'm not saying you need to take your Bible every day and spend 30 minutes or praying for 1 hour, 2 hours of solitude. No. Even if you are able to wake up in the morning and say, thank you, Lord. Or when you're sitting in a coffee shop and you're like, I don't understand, Lord, this is a mess. Why didn't I get a job? Those little moments, those small check-ins with the Lord, I think that is critical for life.
And what are you grateful for?
So a few years ago, I was talking to a friend and I was just saying to him, I went to this place and this happened and this happened. And then he stopped me. He's a missionary in Australia. And he said to me, Jean, and it's like maybe during the pandemic, he said, Jean, no matter what, you should always remember you've lived a very good life. No matter what happens next, you've lived a very good life. And so for me, I would say, despite all the ups and downs, I'm grateful for the life that I've lived and the life that I'm going to live, whatever that looks like. So it's just small things like that. I'm like, oh, actually, God has really done something good. I mean, if you think about me coming from Brixton, the universities that I've been from, a single parent home, I've worked in major investment banks, and I'm still a Christian. Like, I'm still have that relationship with God. So just the life I've lived, I'm grateful for that.
Thanks for listening to Things I Wish I Knew. This episode resonated with me as someone who is also a millennial. It made me think about how we need every generation to work together to build church, and how we should use our experience to hear our calling. How about you? We'd love to hear how Jean's story resonated with you, and why not also tell us if you're facing an experience you wish you knew how to look at differently. It might just be something we can help with. You can find out more about this and other themes at thinkingfaith.org. Thank you again for listening. I hope you'll join me again next time on Things I Wish I Knew.